as a neighborhood group, it was a nice, warm September. We're like, we should have a barbecue. We should show these motherfuckers that we're not afraid, and we're going to, we're going to stand our ground. Well, the city wouldn't let us have a block party because they like we can't be liable for the potential violence that might break out. So we're not going to close the street for you. So I was like, well, we'll do it at my house. I had a big side yard at the time. I had plenty of space. I was like, we'll do it here, and it's right, it's diagonally across the street, but still right in front of them. And so we had, I don't know, probably in the beginning, it was like 30 people here, families, kids, from up and down the street, all just hanging out, having a nice barbecue. Well, then those assholes started. And then the first thing was they're just throwing shit, picking up, fruit, rotten fruit off the ground that had fallen off the tree, and they're throwing it at the people in my yard, and throwing rocks, bottles, whatever they can pick up and throw. They're throwing it, harassing us, and I'm like, this is bullshit. And at the time, I had some ranger friends, a couple of buddies, younger than me, that used to like to come hang out at my house, just get out of barracks. They'd stay here. They wanted to learn, something about some, housing, like carpentry, plumbing, electrical, whatever. They were like, I want to learn. I want to know what you're doing. And so I had a couple of ranger buddies that were already hanging out with me. And so I'm like, we got to talk to these motherfuckers. So the three of us walk across the street. And again, they just think we're Army, and so we're like, hey, and I knew the main guy's name was Marco, and I'm like, I want to talk to Marco, and they're like, fuck you, you ain't talking to Marco, and I'm like, why you want to talk to Marco? And I was like, because you guys better knock off this bullshit and leave these people alone. Quit throwing shit at my house, and they're like, fuck you, motherfucker, blah 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 blah, give me all this shit. I'm like, you need to knock it off. And so finally, the guy looks at me. He said, motherfucker, he said, you don't know who you're fucking with. We're going to come back tonight. We're going to shoot you up and burn your house down. And I was like, you know what? Go ahead and make a mistake because you don't know who you're fucking with. And then we walked away. And most of the time, and encounter these, guys during the year, when they met up with some resistance, they would usually back down, which is kind of what I expected. And but for some reason, they felt emboldened that day, and they weren't backing down. So we kind of watched. Oh, and the interesting thing, again, back to my job as the spokesperson for the battalion. I had a business card from a reporter from the News Tribune because of the impact that article made. So I called this guy up, had his business card because I met him at battalion. I called him up, Dan Bopel. And I'm like, hey, Dan, this is Bill Foulk, Army Ranger, blah, blah, blah. We met at the, he's like, oh, yeah, I remember you. And I said, hey, you might not know this. I said, but did you saw the story about Ash Street? And he said, oh, yeah. I said, well, I live there. And I said, we're having a neighborhood barbecue. And I said, if you're available, I'd like you to come to this barbecue. I'd like you to talk to my neighbors. I'd like you to see firsthand the kind of shit that's going on here. And maybe you could write something about it. He's like, oh, yeah. I'm like, yeah. So he says, hey, is it okay if I bring a photographer? I'm like, absolutely. So he brought this guy, Russ Carmack. So Dan and Russ come to the house. And Russ is like, holy shit. So he goes upstairs to the window that has the view of the thing. He's got a 600 millimeter lens on his camera, and he's taking pictures of these hand to hand. Because there still were some people that are coming, taking pictures of hand to hand, taking pictures of the drug dealers. But then he started taking pictures of all the gang members that were moving in and all the guns. There were 2 cars parked in front of the house over there, and a car would drive by, and they would open up the trunks, and they would transfer guns, rifles, handguns, shotguns. They would just start loading this trunk with all these freaking guns. And they holler downstairs, Bill, we have a problem. He said, there's a lot of people over there, and they got a lot of guns. And then I'd go upstairs, and he'd show me some pictures, I'm like, holy shit. And anyway, I was like, still, it's hard to say what's going to happen, right? Well, then the harassment thing started again. Then they're like, they're driving by and they're like, pointing the gun finger and just bang, bang, and just doing some shit. Well, to be prepared, I had a lot of building materials, and I had collected some planks that had come off of a dock at Fort Lewis out on the water. So this wood was 12 inches by 3 inches by 16 feet long. And I had like 6 of these boards. I mean, it's like wicked heavy. And I took a couple of sawhorses. So I put the sawhorses in the front yard. And then I took this lumber and I stacked it 3 high, 2 deep. So now we got a barricade that's like 16 feet long, 3 feet high, and 6 inches thick. So if anybody starts shooting, anybody that might be in the yard could get down behind this thing and have protection. Now we did a few other things. There's a stairwell on the side over here. Did a couple other things, to basically preparedness. But that was, to me, was like our main, defensive position was like, get behind that barricade and you're fine. Well, then things started escalating a little more. A lot of just, fuck you guys and shit coming by. And then the thing that was kind of like the warning shot was actually a real shot. A car driving slowly down the street, guy in the passenger seat, and then just boom, fires off one round in front of the house, just straight up in the air, just fires off one round in front of the house, and they just kept on driving slowly. And I'm looking, I'm thinking to myself, fuck, man, these guys, they might be stupid enough to actually carry out their threat. And so, again, being prepared as a ranger, rangers live by a ranger creed, which part of that says never to leave a fallen comrade to fall into the hands of the enemy. And I'm well known in battalion. I call the staff duty NCO and the charge of quarters in all 4 companies. And I'm like, is this Sergeant Foulk? I'm about to come under attack at my house, and I need every available ranger now. And gave them the information, the address, and I said, please, just go round up whoever you can, send it to my house. Well, being a Saturday evening, a lot of rangers are out doing what rangers do, and so, but they managed to round up 15 guys. 15 rangers, all personal weapons, all off duty, sent them out here. And so the rangers show up, and I'm like, good. And of course, and then in the meantime, prior to that happening, there were kids here, and I was like, kids can't stay. We got to get, this is not safe. Got to get the kids someplace else. And in fact, I even gave the adults the opportunity. I said, hey, if you think this is too risky, I was like, if you want to call it, we'll call it. But if you want to stay, if we want to stand our ground, then that's what we're going to do. And everybody was like, no, we're going to stay here. And so I'm like, okay. So when the Rangers showed up, and of course, a lot of the civilians are armed. They got their own guns. And, but my plan was I wanted to pair the Rangers with the civilians because I figured that was our best chance of success if we did get attacked. And I told the Rangers, I said, look, while you're paired up in these positions, talk to these guys about, target acquisition or trigger squeeze or anything you want. Try to mentor them, so that they're a better, companion partner in your position. And the Rangers they were like totally into it. They were like, absolutely. So, and it was really funny. There was this one, most of the women stayed in the house, but there was one neighbor down the street, this black gal, Shirley Luckett, little short black lady, man, she was a pistol, funny. And so finally they came around and, I guess people just assumed that she was going to go in the house. And she's like, I'm not going in the house. I'm staying out here with these Rangers. I got my own gun. And so, she was like just hung out and just a great woman. And so she hung out, she got into position and she was working with a Ranger and, that was kind of how it went. Well, things stayed pretty quiet. Everybody's in positions. I mean, these guys were prepared. They actually built a sandbag fighting position up in the back corner on the alleyway. Yeah, because we had a little time. These guys were like, we're bringing sandbags. And I thought that's pretty cool. And so anyway, things were relatively quiet until about 9:30. And then things got like really quiet. And I can remember I'm walking around in the front yard out there. And then all of a sudden, man, it's like being on a military firing range where somebody says, commence fire. And it's just pow, 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 pow from every direction. And just dozens and dozens of rounds going off. And it's kind of funny, these are craftsman style houses. Well, my house and my next door neighbor's house, Ruben, basically same style, built at the same time. My house was a light tan color. His house was a light purple color. But in the dark, they look the same. And so, I mean, I could hear bullets smashing the house, hitting it, like glass breaking, whatever. But I can hear the same thing over there. So Ruben's house got shot to shit as well as this one. And they were shooting from basically all sides. But they're using, they're just shooting. They're just like pointing and shooting. They're hiding behind houses or cars or bushes or trees, whatever. So the Rangers, I told them, I was like, look, don't shoot unless you have a target. You know what? And if you do have a target, if you see a muzzle flash, shoot in the direction of the muzzle flash. Don't let them advance on us. And so that's kind of how it went. So, in the news report, 300 rounds fired, not 300 rounds fired by the Rangers, 300 rounds fired at the Rangers by the gang members. And there were Rangers that returned fire when they had the opportunity. And despite, what the report says, there were three gangbangers that got shot. One got shot right out here. First guy got shot right out front. He came from behind this old Granada that was parked out there, and he starts to run across the street. And my buddy, laying in the prone out there, Bill Alexander, who I verified the story with, he was laying in the prone, 45, and shot the guy. And hit him in the shoulder, and he went down. And it's kind of funny. And then two other guys got shot in the back, in the alleyway back here. But so when the police came, when the first car on the scene, flying down the street, and lights and sirens going, windows down because it's hot. Immediately we stopped. We're like, lay your weapons down, whatever. We immediately stopped shooting. But the gangbangers didn't. So this guy is like, it was like a scene from Die Hard. It sounded like bam, 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 bam. And all of a sudden this guy's like, screeches to a halt, bangs that thing in reverse, and he's like, burning rubber back down the street, spins it around in the intersection, and gone. And I stood out there and look, I was like, oh shit, there goes the police. Now what do you pick up your guns? So then we wait. And shooting is still going on. And I decided to move from the front to the back to see what was going on back there. And then things all of a sudden got quiet. And I was like, what the fuck? And then so I step up into the alleyway. And the next thing I feel is some guy on my back. And I'm like, boom, down to the ground. And then the shooting started again. And so I knew it was a cop. And that he was the one that basically took me down to the ground. And the shooting started, and I was like, hey, you better tell your guys to watch out, stay down. I said, these guys are shooting at us. And he's like, and he was a guy that knew the area. And he's like, and so I try to explain, he's like, what the fuck's going on? So then I tell him, and he's like, well, who the fuck's in charge around here? And I said, well, I guess that'd be me. So this is happening, a very, very quick conversation. So he gets on the radio, tells his officers what's going on because he knows, and we end up getting the Rangers all kind of like migrated back into the yard, and the police officers started moving and chasing. All the gangbangers decided to run down the street, and they were running toward a park down there. Well, the thing about the park is it's like one way in, one way out. You can't get out the other side because there's a cliff. And so the police end up chasing all these gangbangers down there. They've got them rounded up in this park, and there's probably like 25 of them or whatever. And then there's a guy here that's like, it's like, all right, let's talk. What's going on? And so he talks to some of the neighbors. He talks to me, and so myself and one of the other Rangers are walking around with him and kind of trying to explain what's going on, how it's happened, and where we were, where they were. And I told him, I was like, there's a guy that got shot right there, and then a person got shot over there, and a guy shot in the alleyway right here. And he never left the yard. He looks out there and he said, yeah, well, I don't see him now, so we're just going to call that a 0. And I'm like, okay. So maybe I think in a way he was doing us a favor, but in a way he was not, because, that didn't report well when the Rangers got into a 10-minute gun battle and didn't shoot anybody, but they actually did. So, but that's how the official report went, and it's just whatever. So, anyway, we walk around with them and kind of explain it. Things are settled down. They've got all the gang members down the street, and of course these are all people that we know who they are. But then the police come down and they're like, hey, we need you guys to go down there and identify them. And unfortunately, Rangers have integrity, and we're like, I never saw any faces. One guy saw one face, and that was it. And so go down there, and he said, I'm like, we could have gone down there and said, yeah, every single one of them, but we'd be lying. And, we're not going to say what we didn't see, couldn't actually see. More than likely, it was them. What the police should have been doing is dusting them for powder. They should have been doing something else other than relying us to identify shooters, that happened in pitch black dark. So, they end up arresting one guy, cut the rest of them loose. And then, it was interesting because then the Crips must have a phone tree that they activate when this kind of shit happens, because within no time there were frickin' another 100 gangbangers over at that house, just like massed up there in the yard all over the place. And the police were like, fuck, this is bad. And I found out from one of the officers, they actually had SWAT down the street and around the corner where it was not visible. They were on standby in case, things went to shit in a hurry.